Hello, I'm Existent ZD, and yes, I have a face cam now because it is a big stream that I'm going to be doing today. Anyway, for those who don't know me, I've been doing content. I'm Existent ZD. Oh my goodness, I accidentally just played my own stream right there. Anyway, I've been doing content on furries for years now, and on my channel I started all the way back maybe about 3 or 4 years ago, and back then I was pretty staunchly anti-furry at the time, basically, and I was making a lot of videos that some would say are like stereotypical anti-furry videos, stuff you'd see from the 2020s or 2023s or whatever, up until recently when I've exposed anti-furry creators before, like Raxo, for example, and I've covered the anti-furry topics right here on the side, and I've been making arguments against both furries and anti-furries now, as my view on them being that furries are disgusting and anti-furries are not a good solution to it at all. So I have created my own condemnations on the Furry Fandom, which I have put into this giant TXT file of a bunch of arguments which I've listed out here, and I'm going to be going over them and reading them. And for context, I'm not anti-furry anymore. I don't really associate to the anti-furry community that much anymore. So a lot of these come from now, my current position, which stated right here, of sedepravationism, Catholicism, and I probably butchered that name for anybody who is also that position, which is a sedevacantist position. Anyway, this is the condemnation against the furry fandom. The furry fandom is a culture around furries. I refer to this culture as furryism at times. My arguments are against the exact definition of furry given by furries themselves in Wikifur. Note that these arguments do not come from the anti-furry community, this community I condemn later in this document. I give arguments that can be understood by atheists as well as the whole branch of Christianity. My arguments are strongest in the Catholic position, as my position is sedevacantist, sedepravationism, Catholicism. Big name. My arguments are mostly logical points which rely with reliance on some pieces of evidence and examples which I provide. The furry fandom is heavily scrutinized for fetishes and sexual behavior. Furries themselves mostly do not deny this, as Wikifur admits the media portrays this. Wikifur also mentions misinformation, quote-unquote, of people seeing sexualization in the furry fandom. So, I go over here and list 3 different arguments. Erotica is zoophilic, degradation of nature, and guilty by association. Some of you may know the third argument listed as guilty by association, because I've been pushing it for and arguing it for about a year or two by now, with this video being a popular video that I made on that subject. So, erotica is zoophilic. Sexual behavior in the furry fandom is equal to zoophilia. Giving an animal human traits is still making an animal and a species differing from humans. Personification still represents the original object or thing even when given human traits, and this is very apparent in the furry fandom. So, I don't know if this marker actually works, but let's see. Oh yeah. Okay, this is my hand. I'm going to give my hand... See, my hand, I gave it some personification. It has 2 eyes, nose, and a smiley face. So I personified my hand as personification. Gave it some human features right there. When you look at my hand, you still see a hand. You see it represents a hand, even though it has personification on it. It's personified. It has human features to it, but it's ultimately a hand, and it represents a hand and is still a hand. The same thing can be applied with furries. Furries are basically animals, but heavily personified. So they basically still represent animals. Thus, this means that the sexual behavior of, Ferotica, which is furry sexual content, basically still represents an animal. Should I say should I say sex? Basically animal sex. You don't think human when you see furry art, you think animal. Oh wait, hold up. I think I skipped this. Furthermore, if the representation is still of the original object or thing, then sexual acts on it still are represented without personification. You don't think human when you see furry art, you think animal. Evidence is heavily apparent with the idea of fursonas, which describe animals and their features. Thus, it is reasonable to think zoophilia with sexual furry art. I'm gonna have to go into the shower and clean this off. And I already took a shower this morning too. Degradation of nature. This is the second argument here, which is following up on personification's representation. So following personification's representation, it can be reasoned that representing yourself as a human animal is also degrading to your actual nature of being human. It is parallel to the error that LGBTQ makes of gender identities. And arguments on LGBTQ, that's for a different topic, which I'll probably get into later in the future. So this is the same error that LGBTQ makes of gender identities of representing yourself inaccurately. This is where furries and furryism, their identity is, well, like LGBTQ's gender identities, where they create genders to replace sex and the meaning of it for their personality instead. This is a case of hyper-idolization or materialism, or what I would also call individualism, which individualism was, I think, condemned by Pius X in his syllabus of errors. So, if you look online, a lot of people in the LGBTQ community, they have these profiles where they have they list a bunch of crap that they are in their profile. It's because they are hyper individualistic, and they basically idolize themselves in a sense there, where they want to be very unique, let's say. Very, very diverse, as they would say. And so they basically worship that by putting it all over their profile. And with furries, the same thing basically happens as well with their online profiles. Degradation of nature, though, is saying here that you're representing yourself as a human animal, which is degrading to your actual nature of being a human. So you're representing yourself as an animal when you're a human. You can see this with VTubers. You can see this with furries that are fursuiters. You can see this with furries on VRChat. You can see this with not even VTubers, but just furries putting their little art guys in their videos, and they usually don't do this face cam. I mean, I didn't a year ago when I was making videos, but I am now. So all of that is just evidence that they try to represent themselves as the furry creature, or basically the animal, which personification says you're representing yourself still as that animal. You're just giving it, human traits. So people still think animal when they look at your furry persona. And you're basically representing yourself as that. And that is degrading to your nature as a human. Next, guilty by association. The media portraying furries in a light of sexualization and fetishes calls that associating to this community would be a mistake. Regardless if the media is right or not, because the media portrays this, so do the general public which consumes said media. There they will find the community disgusting. And that follows the example of, like, if I were to go to school and I were to, like, proudly say I was like a furry or something, I would probably get quite a bit of people who would give me weird looks. Again, regardless if the media is right or not, associating to a community which the general public sees as disgusting is degrading to your integrity. More on this, furryism is an art style. So it's not like a religion or anything. It's not like something crazy important. It's an art style. Or maybe even furries like call it just like furries, and I don't know. Let me see what you're saying. Can you save this so that after the stream I can show it? Furries. The stream will be saved on my channel. Anyway, so following what I was saying, what the heck was I saying? Anyway, so furries, their entire thing is an art style. An art style isn't very comparable to something like a religion. And even people who are like LGBTQ, they might not even like compare that to furryism, because it may not be as important. Even in regards to LGBTQ, like I'm pretty sure there would probably be quite a bit of people who would put LGBTQ being gay over the standard of being furry. It shouldn't be that important of a thing at all. An art style shouldn't be that important. So when you see that there's other furries doing bad crap, like sexual crap, online, and that's like a trend, and people are associating furries to all of that, which WikiFur, which is the wiki for on furries, admits that the media basically portrays that, then you can see how it would be odd to associate yourself to a fandom of like that. When furryism itself is basically just an art style. It's an art style. And people will try and criticize my arguments and say, yeah, because it's an art style, like what's so wrong with an art style? Like, why would you hate against an entire community? And that actually kind of proves my point, because it is just an art style. So why are you defending it so much? It's an art style. It's not that important. So theoretically, you could give it up really easily because there's a lot of people associating it to sexual things. It shouldn't be like at the top of your priorities, and shouldn't be basically worshipped like a literal religion. Yet these furries still idolize it and defend it in the comments like literal wild animals. And I have streams on my channel where I've gone through this, these two streams basically, where I went over the furries in my comment section on this video right here, and I went through their arguments, and they try very hard to defend this. Keep in mind, what they're defending is an art style. It's not anything important. It's not Christianity. It's not Islam. It's not even Buddhism. It's not even LGBTQ or trans rights or anything. It's an art style. So I see that as further proof that they idolize an art style to an extreme degree. And I would say it's pretty unhealthy, at least for any atheists they could at least see that is pretty crazy. Anyway, let's see. Furryism is art and culture which can be easily given up as it is material. This material does not need to be held above your own integrity, yet furries do that anyway, which is more proof of idolization/materialism that I will mention later on. I'll look at the comments, or not the comments, the stream chat. As a furry, I hate the rest of the fandom. I have my little guy. I made it and that's it. I will get into that later here. I think that actually is the next section. These arguments vary from how atheists determine morality and purpose, which is an insane belief itself to think multiple valid ways of this exist, which create many moral paradoxes. Regardless, these arguments are very strong in most cases, depending on how insane someone is. And basically what this means is atheists might determine this differently, because an atheist could believe the purpose of life is like money, or they could think the purpose of life is like pleasure, like hedonist. And that could vary, these arguments, determining or depending on how insane an atheist is. But regardless, these are pretty atheistic arguments that most atheists could understand. Next, furries being man and animal in combination. Oh, okay, I think it's probably later down. Maybe. Furries being man and animal in combination also creates moral cases for Christianity. Along with this, Christian furs are now a prevalent subcommunity in the furry fandom. So God created mankind in... Okay, wait. These are just the quotes. I'll read those later, actually. Let me get into the points here, and then connect them to these. So, first point, God sees it that furries are beasts. The art of furries is little different to animals, following Ferotica zoophilic. So sexual acts with furries is bestiality, and equal to his condemnation to zoophilia in the Bible. So God created... no, that's later on. He that shall copulate any beast or cattle, letting him die, the beast also ye shall kill. The woman that shall lie under any beast shall be killed together with the same, their blood being upon them. This being the verse. And I'm pretty sure that connects... Yeah, this one connects here, because he specifically mentions beast in here. But when he's talking about beast, he says with any beast or cattle. Beast or cattle. Cattle representing animals. Beast, why do you think he would separate beast and cattle if he was talking about animals, just animals? Why would he put an or there? Cattle obviously represents the animal. Beast, he could be referring to just bestiality, or he could also be referring to furries and furryism as well. Furry art is against that God had created man in his own image. Representation as a furry is depriving your nature as male or female. This includes fursuiters and furry profiles. Animal is below man to God, as man is his children, not beasts. So that follows, so God had created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female, he created them. Just following that verse. So, representation as a furry is, again, depriving your nature as male or female. That's basically this argument, degradation of nature, except it's in Christian context. With this verse right here, with Genesis 1:27. It's basically degradation of nature. It's basically the same. Yeah, it's basically just the same argument, except it's backed by a verse where God says he created mankind in his own image. So he didn't create it in the image of an animal. He created it in the image of himself, in the human image. Next, the name of Christian fur is against God because of furries being against his will from the arguments above. Christian with furry is as contradictory as being a Jewish Nazi. So because these arguments condemn furries, calling yourself a Christian furry is like calling yourself a Jewish Nazi, because Nazis condemn Jews. We condemn furries. Or basically Christianity would condemn furries. So calling yourself a Christian furry is contradictory. Next, we're going over anti-furries here. Alright. Anti-furries were a terrible response to the evils of the furry fandom. Anti-furries prioritize being against furries as their main ideology above all other moral points. They try to unify their own community around being against furries. This is similar to how Protestants and modernists try to unify around believing in God despite their doctrine being extremely incompatible fundamentally. Anti-furries always seem to be at young ages and tend to become furry later on. I mean, I'm literally 16. And back when I was anti-furry, I was about like 15 years old. So it's consistent. Do you realize furries don't think they're animals, right? No, that wasn't what the arguments are talking about. It is impious to say, I respect every religion. This is as much as say, I respect the devil as much as God, vice as much as virtue, falsehood as much as truth, dishonesty as much as honesty, hell as much as heaven. Father Michael Muller, The Church and Her Enemies. This quote applies to anti-furries really, really well. And here's the following arguments on that, which we have 3 points here. Anti-furries make the evil of idolizing anti-furryism over all other moral points. Thus, anti-furries becomes more important than, say, Catholicism. Breaking it down, being against an art form is not as important as being against murder or thieves or sodomites. Thus, anti-furryism prioritizes one moral point to an extreme degree of which is evil. Which, yeah, looking at my channel, I criticize furries quite a bit. And that's why after this stream, for majority of the videos, streams I'm probably going to do after this one, it's probably going to be on other topics because I have bigger fish to fry than furries. And art style, while it's trying to be defended quite a bit by furries, it's not as important as like liberalism, for example. My condemnation on that, it's just not as important. And anti-furries like go after it like it's the root of all evil or something. It's like as bad as like the Jews or something. Anyway, next point. Anti-furries, in their own critical gaze against the furry community, make the error of showing furry art too much. Not only does this contribute to why they become furries, as you are what you surround yourself with, but this is a hypocrisy. If you truly hate an art, especially lustful, then you would not show it, even in critical memes, as it would make some curious, regardless, and become too familiar with such an evil display. Thus, as you surround yourself with evil displays that you say you criticize, you learn to tolerate it, then you accept it. The point some make that anti-furries may have an obsession of furry art, which is why they criticize it, has validity. So on my channel, I try not to show like the suggestive furry art as much, and instead I go for like the fursuiters. The fursuiters aren't the fursuiting seems very crazy, especially to normal people. And the fursuiters, they usually don't have like anything suggestive on them usually, but furries really like to break those rules quite a bit. So I usually try not to show like quite a bit of furry culture on my channel, even though I kind of have to make a point here. But other anti-furries, what that's condemning is other anti-furries, and their memes will show like a furry like animation meme. They'll like play like a full 10-second clip, or even the full 1-minute clip, and the entire thing, it could be suggestive, but it's basically just showing the entire culture of it, and they're basically just getting used to the furry culture by showing it more and more and more in their memes, even though they try to transition to something else, like some military edit or whatever. They still like show themselves to furry content quite a bit, which I believe contributes to why they become furry so much, because you are what you surround yourself with. So that also applies with the media you consume as well. Next point. Most anti-furries are not truly anti-furry. Let me fix my freaking blanket. It is getting hot in here though. Probably because of my PC. And because I live in a desert. Most anti-furries are not truly anti-furry. The word means against furry. Anti means against. But yet some anti-furries will try to radically defend keeping other furry friends of theirs in their circles. This is a direct hypocrisy to their own ideology. There is quite a bit of there's some exceptions to the rule of thumb of tolerance for furries, which it goes into detail here. There is no reason to tolerate furries other than for the greater good of converting them out of being furry. If your intention is not of conversion or any greater good for this person, then give no more tolerance. If this person denies over and over of getting out of being furry, then give no more tolerance. This tolerance will eat away at you instead if these exceptions are not admitted. Remember that you are who you surround yourself with, so remember that surrounding yourself with people of good faith is how you become in good faith yourself. It is better to live alone than live with many treacherous friends. Quote, I prefer truth in solitude to error in company, end quote. Quote by Saint Teresa of Avila. Quote, I have loved justice and hated iniquity, therefore I die in exile, end quote. Quote by Pope Gregory the, I can't read Roman numerals, I think that's the 7th. So basically what this argument is referring to is the anti-furries like Raxo. I made a ton of videos on Raxo here, where I was going over even his response, going over him tolerating even more furries. He was tolerating it to a insane degree, where even he had an alt account of his that was a furry. So basically, he was surrounding himself with a bunch of furries, and I called this out on him, and well, I think even in his own channel, he had furry sexual content that he was showing up, like suggestive art, and some people were calling that out as well. I don't ever know what actually happened to Raxo, because I'm pretty sure he stopped uploading. But stuff like that is how anti-furries turned furry, is because they would do things like that. And they would do exactly what Raxo did. Alright. Other points, because I know some will bring it up. Communities can be evil, as they represent ideas of evil. Example, Nazism. So, if I were in a Nazi community, that community is evil, obviously. So yeah, I would have furries in my comment section say, like, you can't call an entire community evil. So I can't call a Nazi community evil? What are you talking about? Next point. art can be evil as it can represent ideas of evil. Example: Satanism, pornography, and pedophilia. Raxo, he quit YouTube to focus on schooling, but he did become a furry basically because he started to draw furry art. Oh wow, that's not very surprising. looks like my arguments hold up there, don't they? If you're drawing furry art, you basically have become a furry at that point. In fact, that actually is a pretty bad stage. I bet he was pretty closeted. So yeah, art can be evil because it can represent ideas of evil. Satanism, pornography, pedophilia. The same can be applied to the furry fandom. Hate is not evil if you hate evil. Yeah, so there's a bunch of furries saying like, they're like, can't hate a community. Hating is bad. But if you hate evil, then that's a natural good. And we have a quote here. He who is not angry when there is a just cause for anger is immoral. Why? Because anger looks to the good of justice. And if you can live amid injustice without anger, you are immoral as well as unjust. St. Thomas Aquinas. Thomas Aquinas is condemning the fact that, for example, if a pedophile runs loose, that's bad. A pedophile got away with grooming children, that's bad. If you don't feel anger for that, if you don't feel anger that actually happened, then Thomas Aquinas is basically saying it's pretty immoral. If you don't feel hate for that, because that happened, if you don't hate that, that's immoral. That's basically what Thomas Aquinas is saying. And this contradicts what furries would like to say, that hating in general is bad, when no, it's not. We hate pedophiles. So hate is not bad, especially when it's used against something that's evil. Hate against something that is good, however, is evil. Thus, this goes against the modern notion to not hate. Not hating anything entirely leaves evil to not be hated and thus tolerated and thus accepted. Hate all that is evil and love all that is good. Fourth point. Hate of a evil community is good. Hate of an individual and not their actions is evil. I argue on the basis to correct mistake, not to point at furries and say, haha, you're wrong, loser, as this is the evil of pride which more often furries make, with idolization of furryism or LGBTQ pride. Thus, I will not make their mistake. So basically, I argue this on the basis that furries, their actions of participating in furry culture and associating themselves to furries is evil. I argue that as evil. Not that I condemn the actual individual themselves, of which I know can do good, otherwise they would be sent to hell. But I argue that their actions are evil. That's basically what this is talking about. And when I say hate of an evil community is good, it's because a community collectively can do evil, obviously. And a community has its ideals. Community has its principles that it upholds. And the furry community has principles like tolerance, liberalism, acceptance. These ideals are evil, usually in the context that they use them in. Liberalism being exception to that, because it's always evil. See, the acceptance of Catholicism would be good, for example. The acceptance of furries, evil. Next. The following is from personal experience and not part of my main arguments. Although there's some pretty good arguments I think that I do make in here. And this will go over, I think, Burn furs. Yeah, burn furs are people claiming to be against their own fandom. But I'm going to read from the very top here. As a more general statement, I believe it to not be without a doubt that a majority of furries are sexual. So much to say that every single one you will meet is sexual in one form or another. Sources on this topic are very misinformative or skewed, so from my own personal experience, do not trust a furry that they are entirely not sexual. More so, there is a number of furries who will deny the gravity of sexual behavior in the furry community or downplay it. So be wary of this, as it also translates to the reason that sources on this are very misinformative or skewed. And to give an example, this is Frisco man sentenced to federal prison after sexually abusing a minor at a furry convention, which I found this off of a paper cache server. But this basically happened yesterday, July 13th. It's July 14th right now, 2026. So just yesterday, we have a furry sexually abusing a minor at a furry convention. Just yesterday. Officials said that Robertson sexually abused the child victim while at the convention in Georgia. Robertson's actions constitute child molestation and sodomy under Georgia state law. Huh. Interesting that they use sodomy there. People don't usually do that. People don't usually use that word. I'm like, I feel like I'm the only one who usually use that word. Me and my friends anyway. My Catholic friends. And he was only sentenced to 20 years in prison. That's a very light sentence for sexually abusing minors, which in Catholic law would be given a death penalty. So, we have furries sexually abusing minors literally just yesterday. So that goes for your information on how just how frequent this is, because this was a pedophilia case. Just imagine all the cases where it's not pedophilia and it's just furries being sexual in general. That's probably a lot more than pedophilia, which happened literally just yesterday. That's crazy to think about, especially in all these online communities and whatever. The world as a whole has become more sexualized than ever, and with the furry community making such suggestive art, finding a furry that is not sexualized would be finding a quarter of a needle in a 10-foot haystack. This also applies to burn furs and Christian furs. They do not seem any more trustworthy. And I'll get into that more. Next, within many furry subcommunities is a radical central focus on emotion. This applies with morality as well for furries. The concept of this is a thing very prevalent also outside the furry fandom, but exists very prominent in it as well, that needs a noble mention. That'd be a good argument to add to your thesis. What argument? I don't know if this is really a thesis. I mean, maybe. Okay, I'm at this point. Instead of thinking of a logical solution to a moral problem, they will determine that solution via what they feel would be the solution without thinking. This sort of thinking I see very prominent in furry subcommunities to the point it leads to major depression and even suicide. This is but part of the larger issue of suicides around the world of youth. I believe this to be caused by an over-idolization of furry art, of which is made with pouring much emotion into it, thus making them, in a sense, idolize extreme emotion. Or whatever it is. I don't know what argument you're referring to. That furry art attracts minors to the fandom since they resemble cartoon characters. I mean, yeah, that has validity. I could add that. I don't know. I don't know if I actually said that in here. I could have. I might have skipped over that. But yes, that would be a good point. Furries put extreme prioritization on their identity and personality. They seemingly hold this over morality in many cases. I believe furries idolize their furry abominations to extreme degrees. My advice would be to assume everyone with a furry profile online idolizes that furry art to much extreme degrees than they may even realize. Furthermore, you can also see this in other communities, such as with anime. So I know a lot of furries like to point like, what about all these other communities? They're also doing stuff, and which that does have validity. Communities like anime do have that same nature in them. The only difference being that I think furries have, it's more dangerous to the soul. They idolize it, I think, a lot more than anime. That's just from what I have seen. And more mention, I think that finding a furry that is not sexualized is like finding a quarter of a needle in a 10-foot haystack. So not finding a needle in a haystack, finding a quarter of a needle in a 10-foot haystack. That's what I would describe trying to find a furry that's not sexualized in some way. That's how much I think it's rare in the furry community. Now, where was I at? Right here. I see it the most deadly with furries, as the ratio of the furry fandom compared to anime in sexual interest I believe to be much higher, despite anime being larger in industry, which would make sense. So basically anime is a large industry, and it does have like hentai, and that is pretty big. It has all these animation studios, which I know WikiFur touches on this. They try and say that because the anime industry is much larger than the furry industry, like there's a lot more sexual content there, which they leave out the fact that they leave out the fact of ratios. They don't use ratios. They don't touch up on ratios. And that's because I think the ratio of furries to furries being sexual is much higher than people who like anime that are also sexual. Because there's a lot of anime that there's like entire anime TV shows that are not sexual at all. And there's a lot of that. So there's a lot of people who watch anime that are not sexualized. So coming across somebody who likes anime that's also not really sexualized it's a lot more common. A lot more common than finding a furry that is not sexualized. Converting a furry out of furryism is ironically hard, because the same ones who believe to be open-minded or free thinkers will die on a hill for their precious furry art. They may not think they idolize it, but furries will try to defend their art like it is an actual moral position that they cannot give up, when in reality it is just art, something very easy to give up compared to a moral position. Anyone defending furryism is likely subject to it to extreme degrees. I don't think I need to give much comment on that. I know that many furries will deny all that I've said so far, as like I said, they will die on a hill for their art. So this is oriented to anyone who has also seen and willing to accept my pessimistic view of this disgraceful fandom. Now, I do later down here get into some solutions for furries who are more who idolize the culture to an extreme degree. I do give some advice to how to stop that, basically. Anyway, here's where we get into burn furs, or basically furries claiming to be against their own fandom. For burn furs, or any furry claiming to be against their own fandom, they're hypocrites. So I honestly just flat out call them hypocrites. I would extend to anyone to not trust these furries. All of them barely actually act against what they criticize or make good explanations or arguments as to why the fandom is the way it is. That honestly could be due to the fact that there's just not a lot of argumentation on furries. I'm probably one of the only YouTubers that's made good points against the furry fandom that I haven't seen any good refuting of it at all. And I pretty much proved that in in these two streams where I go over the counter arguments furries try to give. They were horrendous. Furries, like, they looked at my video and I think they just skimmed over it. Maybe even asked ChatGPT to solve the argument for them. Which actually has happened. I've had furries try and debate this using ChatGPT. If they truly were against their own fandom, then they would not be in it. It is that simple. Furryism is just an art. If they did not idolize it, they would recognize that furryism is not as important as integrity, and thus they would give it up. This I actually have never seen a single burn fur do in my time interacting with them. So I've never seen a burn fur, like, go from being basically a furry to not a furry because of these arguments. Because they recognize that they idolize being a furry way too much. It would have to be for some other thing, whatever. They have to give it up for some other reason. Maybe the government didn't like it. Maybe the government didn't like their fursuit or something. I don't know. But honestly, in general, I haven't seen a burn fur turn from not being a furry. I haven't seen much examples of that ever happening. And maybe that's just because I haven't maybe lived long enough to see it. I don't know. But I just haven't seen it at all. I find the furry fandom being silly as play of innocence. I think of this to be caused by insecurity. Take this with a grain of salt, as I'm not fully sure of this phenomenon yet and haven't thought too deep of it. So when furries like to be silly, I think there's some play of innocence there, and I think there's something evil going on there. But I haven't thought of it too much yet. So, like I said right here, take that with a grain of salt. I wouldn't use that for any actual argumentation. I just find it suspicious. I find it suspicious. I haven't thought fully on it, but I'm not fully sure of it. I know that it's like furry silly memes have been used to like groom minors, but that's not an actual argument to finding the furry fandom being silly as a play of innocence here, or being caused by like insecurity. I haven't fully thought of this. So yeah, again, take this with a grain of salt. I also will make a mention that I condemn LGBTQ, especially in the furry community, if I had not made that any more obvious enough. I have already given my arguments on this that even atheists can understand in other documents. But if you are Christian, then you have no excuses to support such abhorrent I can't say abhorrent acts. So Protestants, Modernists, Orthodox, even if they see it as wrong, will not give such severity on how truly evil it is. Recognize this, that God had burned and killed everyone of the city of Sodom for such acts. Which we have a bunch of verses here. This is 3 pages of just verses on homosexuality, or sodomy. Quote, "No sin in the world grips the soul as the accursed sodomy. This sin has always been detested by all those who live according to God." End quote. By Saint Uh, Bernardine. I can't say his name correctly though. Next, here's the advice that I give for furries, anyway, for any genuine furries that may exist. So for any genuine furries that may exist in a unfathomable few number that are looking to get out of their mess, I will give advice. Get rid of all furry content you have and disband from anything furry you participate in. This is due to with the guilty by association and the fact of you are what you surround yourself with. If you surround yourself with a bunch of furry content, then you're gonna be more furry. You're gonna be more inclined to be more furry. Keep looking at the content. Keep doing whatever furries do, which I know what they do. Just not gonna list it off the top of my head right now. Burn bridges with unhealthy friendships to the fandom. In parentheses, that means most of your friendships with other furries. In parentheses, which burning bridges to friendships, it could be in a lot of cases, like if you have like a really old friend, you know this friend from like for like 60 years or so, and they're a furry, burning a bridge there, I mean, you don't. The thing with that is that you could, because you've known them for so long, you could convince them that to not be furry or to drop these ideals. And because you've known them for 6 years, that gives you that gives a lot of trust between you and your friend. So burning a bridge there might not be worth it in that case, but I think with most cases, with friendships with furries, burning the bridge there is usually good. The less you surround yourself with the culture, the less you feel the need to submerge yourself in it. Look on at it with disgust, as you will learn to avoid it. As I presume that most furries are sexualized, do the same with sexual content. It should be treated with utmost disgust, even more so than furryism itself. With women in real life, which typically are very immodest, keep your eyes away from them. Look away from their immodest and suggestive appearances with disgust that the modern world would tolerate such a thing. Get rid of anything that will trigger you to become more sexualized if possible. Learn to not include sexualization in your communication. There's also a lot of videos on YouTube online that also cover that as well. But usually on the points, they don't usually make a point that women in real life usually are very modest with their clothing, and a lot of them also don't usually say to get rid of literally everything that would trigger you to become sexualized. A lot of them don't usually mention that in their YouTube videos as well, from what I've seen. Next, here, this is basically the end of the document here. The furry fandom is cursed of idolization, lust, materialism, sodomy, and many more. I condemn it with this document. If lust kills the soul, then furryism nails your coffin shut. Live your life not reflected as a beast, but as the purity of your soul, which give you humanity. And yeah, that's basically that is the meat. That is the core of all of these arguments here. And I could probably yap on for a lot on a lot of these. I just don't like it when people make being a furry make it its whole personality. I think a majority of people who call them, if you call yourself a furry, you're basically doing that. You call yourself burn fur, you also do that. Because you're willing to title yourself to this art community. Like it's like a literal position. Like it's a literal like moral position, or like it's a literal like like it's such a big thing, a part of your life. You're willing to call yourself a furry. You're willing to label yourself as something over an art style. And Therians? Therian. I'm pretty sure Therian is pretty close to furry. Let's look at the definition of a Therian. I'm not going to look at the AI overview. Give me an actual definition here. Can I... Wikipedia article on Therian. Oh, I think it does give a definition here. Therians, also known as therianthropes, are individuals who identify as one or more non-human animals. You identify as non-human animals. That sounds a lot like furries, not gonna lie. Because furries will not say they identify as furry, but they call themselves furry, so they basically do. And this is identifying as one or more non-human animals. I don't know why they added non-human here. They could just say animals. So you identify as an animal. I think that's worse than furries. Because you are quite literally calling yourself an animal, representing yourself as an animal. Which would follow the arguments of degradation of nature most prominently. I think degradation of nature would apply to Therians. Therians are often considered a subset of otherkin. I don't know what that is. The enduring experience of identifying as a non-human animal, as well as the broader lived experience of Therians, is commonly referred to as therianthropy. That's insane. I think I could make stronger arguments against Therians than furries. Anyway, next part of this, I was going to get into the actual wiki fur. Right here. This is the actual Furry Fandom wiki right here. More specifically, which, I mean, there's the definition of furry up here, but I don't really care much about that. Let's look down here. Furry hate groups. They have an article on anti-furries. I wonder how much they butcher that. I might look at that in a second. Furry politics. Unsympathetic media. In years past, the only value the mainstream media has seen in the furry fandom has been overemphasis on fetishes and lifestyles within the community. Many of those who were interviewed for such media portrayals claimed they were deliberately misquoted. As a result, misunderstanding of the nature of the fandom has been widespread. So they say it's a misunderstanding of the nature of of the fandom. When we have sexually abusing a minor at a furry convention literally a day ago. Yeah, I don't think that would be misunderstanding the nature of the fandom. Especially with these arguments, I think I understand the exact nature of the fandom. But hey, maybe the media doesn't, which is what they're saying here. However, this appears to be changing as less sensational media sources are starting to take a note of the community, which are more inclined to see interest in the fandom aspect. The fandom aspect. So they're basically implying that fetishes and lifestyles within the community is not a part of the fandom aspect. That's basically what they're implying. However, this would need to be changing as less sensual, which are more inclined to see interest in the fandom aspect. So they're saying that the furry fetishes and lifestyles, you know, erotica, all of that apparently is not in the fandom aspect. So what's in the fandom aspect? Is it safer work furry art? Is that what you call in the fandom aspect? I mean, I didn't see that anywhere else on this page. They just imply that right there. And hey, I would say that furry sexual art is pretty prevalent in the fandom and a pretty big part of the fandom. It's pretty hard not to find. Self-criticism. The furry community is also sometimes criticized by its own for being too tolerant, various things, especially the overvisibility of controversial fetishes. So, yeah, apparently Wiki4 even self-criticism, the furry fandom criticizing itself is so prevalent that they even put this on the they even put this on Wiki4 here. Which, if we look at this post on Twitter by Fox26 Houston, where they cover this event which happened, which is basically this. We look down in here, of course we have the anti-furries here, the stereotypical guys. But we also have furries here. We're saying this guy doesn't belong to the fandom, which is basically what they're talking about with self-criticism here. Particularly for those who are only in the community because of an interest in furry cartoons, it may be profound and painful that the community feels free to associate them with things that seem completely unrelated to the fandom for furry characters. They say it may be painful that the community feels free to associate them with things that are completely unrelated to the fandom. Are they saying? Okay, we'll go on. Other furries will then turn on those who claim not to want to be associated with every controversial element in the community and accuse them of being a detriment to the stability of the community, often accompanied with accusations of Nazi behavior or being a burned fur. They accuse them of being a burned fur? Furries fighting themselves on if you're a burned fur? That's pretty crazy. Over the years, many furries have left the fandom in a state of grief over such controversies and disputes. Honestly, I have not seen that at all. Not gonna lie. Although I've seen, I can understand the Nazi accusations. People throw around Nazi accusations like crazy. In fact, the furries in my arguments against them and here, because I gave one single Nazi example, they thought I was calling the entire furry fandom Nazis, which is completely stupid. Though they also make a mention on burned furs, which is very interesting, because they get into the history of burned furs. Which the history of burned furs is really interesting as well. Let's see. Which was founded by Squeerat, Peter Sham. I don't really care about these guys, but oh geez, there's opposition. There's oppositions. Oh my gosh, what is freezing furs? Oh boy, where's the thing I'm looking for specifically? The group is often accused of wanting to impose some sort of anti-sexual vision on the rest of the fandom, despite many members of the organization being creators of furry erotica, which is pretty interesting. So Burn Fur beliefs, which their general beliefs is being against like their own fandom, yet Burn Furs in their creation of their little group, there was still many members of the organization being creators of like furry erotica, which is furry sexual content. It's pretty ironic, and also the wiki for refers to imposing some sort of anti-sexual vision. They kind of like quote that in a sense that that's somehow bad. Like imposing anti-sexual vision on the rest of the fandom is bad. And this is pretty interesting because they impose some sort of anti-sexual vision on the rest of the fandom. That's also implying that sexualization in the fandom is part of the fandom. They imply that in Wikifur right here. Yet over here, they imply like fetishes and lifestyles in the community. You know, like the sexual content. They imply that that's not part of the fandom aspect. It's really interesting. You can already see there is hypocrisy working in here within their own Wikipedia, within their own Wikipedia articles. They also cover anti-furries here. Wow, this page is really short. Anti-furries, also known as furry haters or furry critics, are those individuals who either dislike or hate the furry fandom and furries in part as a whole, including all aspects of it: sociology, lifestyle, art, costume play, fursuiting, furry sexuality, etc., based on personal or group's opinions, facts, real zoo files, or hoaxes, litter boxes, or just for trolling behavior. Anti-furries are sometimes referred to as non-furs, or mundanes. Although the latter is more commonly used to refer to anyone who is not a member of the fandom. So they call non-furs isn't commonly referred to somebody who's not a member of the fandom? That's interesting. According to the Wikipedia. Previous members of the furry fandom who have become disgusted with furries, i.e. burn furs, they may consider themselves anti-furry while still continuing to produce or consume media relating to anthropomorphics or personas, or participating in conventions or mucks. Conversely, they may not only cease any interest or association with the fandom in the future, but will actively deny any previous involvement. So yeah, even in Wikifur, they also admit that like these burn furs, they sometimes they consider themselves anti-furry, which is interesting. I haven't seen that myself yet. Burn furs considering themselves anti-furry, but I have seen anti-furries themselves consuming like media relating to furry content, and they also point out that these burn furs, and I'm pretty sure. Okay, no. They just point out that burn furs may consider themselves anti-furry while still continuing to produce or consume like furry content, which is another notable point there against burn furs. Anyway, there's probably a lot that I could go over in Wikifur, because I think they do make quite a bit of inaccuracies in there. But I think I basically just used a bunch of Wikifur's own statements in there as the basis of these arguments as well, in regards to defining a furry or what they say in regards to like how much furries get scrutinized or whatever with the media. It's basically what I also use with these arguments, because if the furries themselves are also saying that they do get scrutinized by the media, then that could be a notable mention in my arguments, which I do mention in here. Anyway, I think that's about it. I don't think I have much more to explain here. In short, I condemn furries and I condemn anti-furries as well. Both of them I don't view as very good. And I probably won't make another stream or video like this, at least for quite a while. Because, like I said, I have bigger fish to fry than furries. Because it's an art style. It's not that crazy. But hey, furries who defend it, they act like it's crazy. They act like it's a literal moral position. And they argue it pretty horribly as well, if you've watched my streams going over some of their arguments. I think furries have tried to use the association fallacy on me, and in argumentation I've already covered that. At least in regards to guilty by association. I don't know what kind of crazy arguments they would have to spin up for erotica, zoophilic, and degradation of nature. I think I've had, and the funny thing is, my as time goes on, I don't seem to retract any of my points at all. I've actually been finding more arguments to make against furries. So I've been able to conjure out even more arguments against furries, instead of having to retract any arguments I make or anything like that. I've just been finding more arguments to make against them, and then making arguments against anti-furries, and then making arguments against furries who are against their own fandom. Which really should show a point, because if you've been following up with my channel or my arguments, I didn't have this and I didn't have this before. I only had this. I only had guilty by association before. I think all of this entire video was, I think, 2 arguments. It was guilty by association, it was this argument, and it was, let me see here. I think it was this argument right here. So I made this argument and I made this argument in this video. So that means I added 1, 2, 3, and technically 4. Basically 4 more arguments on top of those 2 that I was giving. So I found more arguments to make against the furry fandom than having to retract any of my points. And more so going into detail on the, okay, that's not my live streams, and more so going into detail on the garbage counter arguments that they try and make, which I literally go also into detail here on the really lazy, sloppy counter arguments they try and give here. So that should also send a point. That should also send a message there. I think furries, if I had to describe them, furryism, their culture, it like latches onto them like a leech, like a xenomorph face hugger, and getting it off is really hard. You really got to pull that thing off, because furries, while you're trying to pull it off, maybe with arguments, maybe with trying to convince them or whatever, they usually are taking their 2 hands and trying to shove it back on. Why? Because they consume a ton of furry content that's basically a big portion of their lives. Should it be a big portion of their lives? I would say no, not really. It's just an art style. It's not that important. It's like the same arguments I can make against sports, where people make kicking a ball around like a big portion of their life. That also doesn't make much sense either. Same can be said for furry art style. It's also not that important. Just like kicking a ball around, which this right here, I was in soccer. This is a shirt that I have because I was in soccer. So I do know that kicking a ball around is not that important, and I didn't take it that seriously at all. In fact, I dropped out of soccer. So this shirt is actually old, though it still fits me. The same arguments against sports there, in a sense, can be applied to furries as well. Art style is not that important. It shouldn't make your entire life. Same way you shouldn't be screaming at a TV because somebody got a goal on screen. It is the same way why you shouldn't be maybe screaming into the microphone about how much you love furries. Or maybe, I don't know, making like an entire VTuber persona of being like this furry creature. You could do the same thing by like making like a VTuber guy of like Cristiano Ronaldo or whatever. That would be making the same sort of evil there. But my condemnation on sports is a different topic. It's not a topic for furries anyway. Just an example. Anyway, that's basically it for this video. I said video even though this is a stream. I might make it a video maybe. But all streams and videos probably going forward are I'm probably not going to mention much more on furries. This entire stream is basically my end game right here. I've condemned furries for years now. I've had these arguments for a year or 2 years. Even I think this is right around when I converted to Catholicism, was when I was criticizing Raxo. So for about a year or 2 now, and I haven't found a single good point against these arguments. Not a single one. And these arguments are still, I think these still hold up really strong. Even though these two being pretty new. Guilty by association, there's never been a good point against it. It's been really strong. But if I do have to defend my arguments again, for whatever reason in the future, I will. But for now, this is probably my last big major stream or big major video, and I did a whole face cam and everything for this because, again, like my channel mostly has been covering furries and arguing against furries, and I've done it for a very long time, and I've made a bunch of arguments on it. And clearly I do know the topic pretty well. Unlike a lot of furries in my comment section. So, anyway, that's about it. I'll see you later.